Okay, so we're going to be reading our last bedtime story. And again, as soon as I stop reading, Winston seems to know that it's time to get up in my lap. Yeah, so we're going to read the last little part of this story. We left all of the families in their wagons starting out across the Great Salt Desert. Doesn't that sound terrible? Great Salt Desert. Great Salt Desert. Oh, oh, that sounds terrible. Terrible, terrible, huh? Yeah. All right, so this chapter, just to make yourself at home, this chapter is called Across the Desert. During all of this time, the little black book of their travels had been faithfully kept by Mr. Reed. The last few days of August were spent, according to his records, laying in a supply of water and grass. On Sunday evening they started, making 12 miles to a sulfur spring in the mountains. Some of the water they had taken was already used up, because immediately when you're traveling across the desert, you get more thirsty because it's hotter. And also, when you know there's no water, at least for me, if I know there's no water, I suddenly feel really thirsty. I'm dying of thirst, right? So they've already used up most of the water that they filled. They put in their wagons when they were at the wells. Some of the water they had taken was already used up, but they could not refill their buckets from this spring. It might be poison, Virginia whispered to Patty. They couldn't forget what had happened to Bully and George. The new oxen were already suffering from thirst. They snorted and sniffed the air, ready to wheel towards the fresh water behind them. Get along there, shouted the teamsters, not daring to let them turn back. Ahead, beyond the range of gray mountains, there was nothing to be seen but a flat plain, unbroken even by sagebrush. In the distance was something white that looked like snow. It's salt, the children were told. It's the Great Salt Desert that you see ahead of us. Hastings lied. Anyone can see it's more than 40 miles across. I'd say it was nearer to 80. I'd say it was nearer to 82 because I've driven across it. It is not 40 miles long. For you to drive across it, if you're going 65 or 70 miles an hour, it takes you like an hour and a half to 2 hours to drive across it. It goes all the way from Nevada to the top middle part of Utah. So it's definitely 80 miles, definitely not 40 miles long. So he did lie to them. Anyone can see it's more than 40 miles across. I'd say it was nearer 80. It can't be that far. You can't tell about distance in the desert. You see those mountains? What mountains? Several voices asked. Mr. Reed pointed. I can barely make them out. That must be the Pilot Range. There's supposed to be a spring at the foot of Pilot Peak. Pilot Peak isn't until you get into Nevada. So they're like they're still in Utah. And so he's seeing these mountains and he's thinking that they're really close, but they're not that close. There was nothing to do but push ahead toward the distant spring. After another day of traveling, the mountain range seemed no nearer than when Mr. Reed first pointed it out. I brought some water along when I'm reading this. So, because I knew that I would get thirsty when I was reading about all of this sand and salt. Another day of traveling, the mountain range seemed no nearer than it was when Mr. Reed first pointed it out. More water had been used up. Still more was used the next day and the next. The children suffered from heat and thirst by day and from bitter cold at night. The oxen looked ready to drop. Sort of like this dog right here. Ready to drop. You guys see him? He's like... let's see. There was nothing to do but push on ahead toward the distant spring. After another day of traveling, the mountain range seemed no nearer than when Mr. Reed first pointed it out. More water had been used up. Still more was used the next day and the next. The children suffered from heat and thirst by day and from bitter cold at night. The oxen looked ready to drop. "We have to do something. We can't go on this way with no water," Mr. Reed declared. "I'll ride ahead to the spring and bring back as much as my horse can carry." The palace wagon, being heavier, was far behind the other wagons, but with fresh water to drink it was hoped the oxen could still pull all the way across the desert. "Maybe they can't make it, though. If they get too thirsty, you'll have to unchain them and drive them ahead to the water." "What about us?" Mrs. Reed said to her husband. "I'll bring water back to you as fast as I can. Suck on sugar lumps, anything to keep your mouths from getting dry. Drink milk when you can. Bayless will look after the cows. They have to have water. Milk them before you drive them ahead." Mr. Reed gave a few instructions to Milt and the two other teamsters before he rode away across the desert in search of the spring. Virginia, gazing after him, said, "I hope Pa doesn't follow a mirage. That sure looks like a lake ahead, but I know it isn't." "Water! Water!" cried Tommy, beginning to run towards it. Mrs. Reed pulled him back. "It isn't water. You know how it fooled us before. The sun does it when it shines on the salt." Sorry, he's just like, it really is a bedtime story. You're going to see a snortling dog, huh? He kind of snores and snorts, and his snoring kind of sounds like snortling. You're a little bit of a snortler. Now he's wagging his tail. Yes, I'm a snortler. Whew. She stopped. Tommy still didn't understand. Even Mr. Eddy, sensible man that he was, had been fooled by the mirages. Once he had cried out that he saw Hastings himself coming back to guide the Donner Party. "He has 20 men with him," he had reported. "That's strange, they're all alike. Now they've stopped." "But you've stopped, Eddy." It had been a mirage like the one Tommy saw now. The sun, striking back blindly from the surface of the salt desert, played all kinds of tricks. Virginia saw people too, but she knew they were ghost people and would vanish like the lakes and the green meadows when they were walking. "Nothing seems real anymore," she said to Patty. "It's making me thirsty. I wish we'd never left our home in Illinois. This is home now." Patty was talking about the palace wagon. It was no longer moving. Shortly after Mr. Reed left, Milt unchained the oxen and drove them ahead to water. But where was the water for the people left in the stranded wagon? "Papa will bring it soon," the children kept saying, as if trying to make themselves believe it. After another night of suffering, Mr. Reed finally returned with a little water for his family. Walter Heron took his horse back to the spring, but did not return with it. The teamsters didn't come back either. All day Mr. Reed waited for them, not daring to leave his family alone in the desert. By evening the situation had become desperate. There was nothing left for them to do but walk. "May I go in the wagon and kiss my dolls goodbye?" said Patty. "I can bring the littlest one, can't I? She can ride in my pocket." Virginia wanted to bring something too. She glanced longingly at her books. Eliza came back to hurry the children along. "That Bayless," she grumbled. "I don't know what's keeping him. When he gets back here, I'll give that brother of mine a piece of my mind." "Where are the oxen? Why doesn't Milt bring them?" Virginia wondered. Looking back at the palace wagon and the two other wagons that they had been forced to leave in the desert. Sorry, can't turn the page. I've got a dog on me. The other wagons they had been forced to leave in the desert. She felt again as she had felt when they drove away from Fort Bridger without her pony, but this time she did not cry. Her eyes smarted, but no tears came. "I have to keep up. Dear God, I have to keep up," she kept telling herself as she stumbled on. Mile after mile she walked in the darkness, each step seeming to be the very last she could take. Patty soon began to fall down from weariness and thirst. Jimmy stumbled, fell, and could not get up. "Bless him, he's sound asleep," Mrs. Reed whispered, bending over him. A shawl was spread on the sand. Here it was almost pure salt, as white as snow. Mr. Reed placed Tommy, already asleep, beside Jimmy on the shawl. Virginia and Patty cuddled close to them, trying to keep warm. A bitter wind was blowing across the desert. I'm cold, cold, Patty began to whimper. Another shawl was spread over the shivering children. Finally, Mr. Reed called all 5 dogs. This is the part where the dogs save them. He's like, okay. Mr. Reed called all 5 dogs. Barney, Tyler, Tryler, Tracker, and Little Cash. Cruz, when I read this in class, your brother got all offended that they had a dog named Cash. None had gone ahead with the men who were driving the cattle to water. They might as well be of some use. He commanded them to lie down on top of the children. For a little while the whole family slept there on the desert, with the chill wind blowing salt and sand. Sorry, I lost my place. Over the strange mound of huddled up people and dogs. We're going to stop right there. So this is a picture of what it looked like, right? There's the people are all huddled, and then the dogs are on top of them to try to keep them warm, which is kind of what we do at our house at night, huh? We have a dog pile, huh? At night, the doggies keep us warm. We all keep each other warm. All right. So I hope you're enjoying reading about listening to this account of these real life people and their struggle to get to California. It kind of makes you grateful that we have cars and that we don't have to travel like this anymore in wagons. So you're going to see they've had to give up their Palace wagon. Somewhere the Palace wagon is probably still there in the on the Great Salt Desert. It probably sunk. Things tend to sink in the salt desert really quickly, and so it's probably sunk and got buried with by the wind, by salt and sand. So but it's probably still there, buried somewhere. If archaeologists could go out and find it, if they knew exactly where they stopped the wagon. So now they're not going to have a wagon. In some ways, that's a good thing, because it means that they don't have to worry about oxen. They don't have to worry about dragging all their stuff. But in other ways, not having a wagon is a bad thing, because they have no way to carry water and they have no way to carry food. And so carrying water is really heavy. So they're going to have to put their water and their food in other people's wagons. And it's going to kind of make the other people mad, right? It's like if you and I were walking home together and I couldn't carry my backpack anymore, and so you had to carry it for me, you would get kind of irritated that you had to carry my backpack for me. After several miles, you would get a little bit annoyed with that. And so that's what kind of starts to happen. The other people that are in the wagon train kind of get annoyed with the Reeds because they're having to carry all of their food and water. And but they left everything else left everything else behind in their Palace wagon. So all their books, all their other supplies that they had, which is kind of sad for them. All right, so we will stop right there and we'll pick up. Something really terrible is going to happen right when we start reading the next part. Something to look forward to. All right, hope you have a good night's sleep. Talk to you later.